سورة الفاتحة. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين بارئ الخلائق أجمعين، والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين المبعوث رحمة للعالمين، شفيع المذنبين وحبيب قلوب الصادقين، سيدنا ومولانا أبي القاسم محمد. اللهم صل على محمد وعلى أهل بيته الأطيبين الأطهرين الهداة المهديين، ولعنة الله على أعدائهم إلى قيام يوم الدين. رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقه قولي، أما بعد، فقد قال الله عز وجل في القرآن المجيد: بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. ألا إن أولياء الله لا خوف عليهم ولا هم يحزنون، الذين آمنوا وكانوا يتقون، لهم البشرى في الحياة الدنيا وفي الآخرة، لا تبديل لكلمات الله، ذلك هو الفوز العظيم. صلوا على محمد وآل محمد. Over the last few days, we have been talking about the life of a believer in terms of its spiritual quality of being able to triumph over and transcend the difficulties, the challenges that we have within our life. A believer may experience many crises, but those crises don't define and don't conquer that believer. As the Quran says, the life of a believer is not one that is suffering in this world and reward or pleasure in the hereafter. But the believer has no fear, no huzn, no grief, no sadness in this world. They have good tidings in this world and good tidings in the hereafter. If you live a life of iman and a life of taqwa, that means that you are living a life of the spirit. Your soul is alive and thriving. And if the soul is thriving, then material circumstances, neither favorable circumstances nor unfavorable circumstances, cannot overpower the soul, because the soul is above and not within or beneath the material world. And in light of that, we talked about several different types of crises or challenges that a believer may experience, and how it is that we can think about those challenges in order not to be brought to our feet or brought to a difficult position in our life because of those challenges. One of those challenges is what to do with our free time, what to do with our leisure. How should we amuse ourselves? And as we said, there are two perspectives that you can have. One is a static perspective of what is allowed in Islam and what is not allowed, what is recommended in Islam and what is not recommended, and that is important. But perhaps just as important or even more important is a dynamic perspective of what kind of environment and, most importantly, what kind of associations should I have to make sure that I will be able to make good decisions about where to spend my time, where to spend my resources throughout my life. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. That comes from enjoying the company of other mu'mineen, the company of other believers, developing that relationship, and then benefiting from the interactions with our fellow believers. The pleasure that a believer has in the company of other mu'mineen, other people who also want to live a life of purity and piety, is one of the best pleasures. And it prevents us from making many mistakes. It brings us back from the brink if we are liable to make a mistake. And that might be one reason why it is recommended in Islam not to be alone for extended periods of time. It is recommended in Islam not to spend the night alone in a house. If you are alone, then invite a friend or a companion or go to somebody, but not to spend that night alone. It is recommended in Islam not to eat alone. It is recommended in Islam not to travel alone. So extended periods of solitude are not recommended in Islam. There is a limited benefit for certain types of solitude in order to be able to facilitate ibadah, in order to facilitate contemplation. But by and large, throughout our lives, and even many of our fara'id and many of our ibadat, they have been taught to us in a way where congregation and companionship and being part of and benefiting from the sincerity and the intentions and the example of a group is preferable to being alone. That is the general lesson that we gain from Islam. That gives us a dynamic and a lifelong way of ensuring that we will be able to make better decisions than we may be able to make on our own, than we were perhaps able to make in the past. So that is one challenge. And that brings us to the value of good companions. That companionship and the esteem that we hold our fellow believers in, it derives from their role not just as companions, but as fellow travelers on the spiritual path, people whom we are going to help and who are going to help us. So our relationship of wilayah to our fellow believers is based in the fact that this is a journey that is best embarked on and that is best triumphed in if we are not alone as we embark on that journey. We need companions who can assist us. There is a hadith of our beloved Prophet Muhammad al-Mustafa sallallahu alayhi wa alihi. He asked his companions that, can you tell me, out of all of the teachings that I have given you, the different changes that I made to your culture, to your practice, to your conception of what is valuable and worthy, ayyu ural iman awthaq, which of the handles of iman is the most firm handle? Imagine if you're trying to climb to a height. Spiritually, we're trying to ascend to a height. So if you're climbing and you have an old tree house, an old ladder, it's a little rickety and not quite very sturdy, you're not going to trust each step. You don't know if it's still as strong as it was in the past. You don't know if it's designed to hold your weight. So you're not going to trust that handle. Or if you go rock climbing, you might have to first check and see if you have a good grip before you put your weight and try to lift yourself to a height. So if we compare Iman to that ladder or to rock climbing or whatever other experience we may have of lifting ourselves, which of those handles, which of those grips is the most firm? And all of us will have an answer in our mind. We have perhaps certain rituals that we think are important, And all of those rituals, we have the basic fara'id of salat and siyam and zakat and hajj. They are bunyanul Islam, bunya al-Islamu ala khams. They are part of the foundation of Islam. Salat is amududdin, so it is a pillar of faith. They're all important. And the companions told the Prophet, somebody said it might be salat, somebody said it might be zakat, somebody said it might be hajj, somebody said it might be fasting, somebody said that it might be jihad. All of those answers were given to the Prophet. And the Prophet said that everything that you have mentioned is a handle. Everything that you mentioned is a grip. It's going to keep your faith on some level. But even those that we might think are very important, they are not the most firm handle. And what was the firmest handle that the Prophet told his companions? He said that al-hubbu fillah wal-bughdu fillah. To love for the sake of Allah and to dislike and dissociate from people for the sake of Allah. To have relationships for the sake of Allah. There might be somebody that I don't get along with. Their personality and my personality is not compatible. And I would not have much to do with them, but because that relationship is something that Allah wants me to honor, maybe they are a relative. Maybe they are somebody I have an obligation to. Maybe they are somebody who has done a kindness to me in the past, and that brings a spiritual obligation on me to repay that kindness. Maybe they are somebody who is in need of my generosity or my assistance. And even if I might not get along with that person, then I have an obligation to that person. Check and see what relationship does Allah want me to have with that family member, the relative, the community member, the old acquaintance, the different people in our lives. If that is a relationship that Allah wants me to honor, then I will love that person for the sake of Allah. And if there is somebody who is fun to be around, I've known them for a long time, we have a history and memories and a great deal of shared interest, but that is not a relationship that is pleasing to Allah or a relationship that is permitted. Either because that person is a bad influence on my own life and character, or for whatever other reason. If I can say that Allah does not want me to continue or to develop that relationship for me to be able to say that for the sake of Allah, I will reduce my contact, or in extreme cases, maybe even eliminate the contact. If my relationships are for the sake of Allah, then that is the firmest handle of faith. What that means is that a person might become habituated to pray. A person might become habituated to fasting. A person may even become habituated to material generosity. But all of those acts of worship can become second nature and habit, and they can become rituals, and they can become stale. It's possible that my prayer is simply a matter of habit and guilt. That I feel uneasy if I don't pray. I feel like I've missed something that is a habit for me. Some of us, we have those habits. If we're nervous, then we have to fidget, or we have certain actions that we do, certain things that we say, just to kind of calm our nerves. They've become part of our personality. There isn't much meaning to those actions beyond that calming effect it has on our soul. And it might be possible that some of our ibadat, our dhikr, our worship will have that similar kind of effect. But if we want those very acts of worship to remain meaningful and productive, then they have to be rooted in a relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It's not the static thing that you do that is going to preserve your faith, but it is that dynamic relationship you have with Allah and for Allah that is going to preserve your faith. And that relationship, the dynamic, is going to be preserved not just by connecting with Allah, but by maintaining our relationships on this earth for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, even if it be against our habit, our preference, and our first inclination. That's going to inform all of our relationships. And that is the firmest handle of faith. It will ensure that we don't lose our faith. We don't become desensitized to questions of faith if we form our relationships for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So if we move from now our relationships, one of the ways that we honor those relationships is to use our material resources for the sake of our spiritual goals and purposes. So the next crisis that I would like us to think about is that crisis of our wealth, our material possessions, our income. Is that a factor that we should think of as potentially being a crisis? Most people think of the crisis as being when they don't have enough money or enough resources to be able to meet their needs. So poverty, and in particular extreme poverty, is a crisis. But if I have my needs, and if I have a little bit of a cushion, then I don't think that I am in a crisis. And if I have more than I need, then I don't think of that as a bad thing, I think of it as a good thing. When people in the time of Musa saw Qarun, who's mentioned in the Quran, and had a great deal of wealth, they would say that if only we had what Qarun had. Even as they judged him for being ungrateful to Allah, they would say, if only we had what he had, then maybe we would be more pious, we would be able to be better people, we wouldn't have to worry about our material well-being, and that would be better for us. So now, the question that I want to ask is, which is the graver crisis? Not having enough, and not necessarily extreme poverty, but if your expenses are $5,000 a month and you have $4,500. So somehow you have to bring that shortfall to pay your rent or your mortgage or your insurance or whatever other expenses you have. Is that the graver crisis? Or if your expenses are $5,000 a month and you have $5,500, so you have $500 extra. Generally speaking, in our society, we think of wealth, we think of income in terms of what we have. There are people who are very negatively disposed to wealth. They might take a vow of poverty. They might look down on the wealthy and make that assumption that those who are wealthy tend to be arrogant or self-centered. They will look down on wealth and on the wealthy and on the culture or the habits of the wealthy. There are other people who are disdainful and they look down on those who are poor. There is an entire culture of worshiping and honoring material success. Generally, it is in terms of material success that we tend to think of the question of our wealth, of our income. For many people, as they earn more, their sense of self-esteem and confidence and self-worth goes up. In fact, we ask that question in America, how much are you worth? The Islamic logic is قِيمَةُ كُلِّ امْرِئٍ مَا يُحْسِنُهُ. Your worth is the good that you do and what you do well. But if I were to ask any of you, or if you were to ask me, how much are you worth? It's not going to be how well I do my religious obligations and my character and my morals and how much I have tried to develop myself so that my temper is under my control, my jealousy is under my control. It's not the good that I do, but I will immediately have a number. Most of you who are above the age of 18 probably have some idea what your credit score is. And most of you probably have some idea of what your net worth is. A better idea, even if we don't know the exact number, and even if you don't check your investments 12 times a day, you probably have a better idea than many of us have given to our spiritual net worth, than what moral attributes we have let rust and what moral attributes we have developed. So it's often viewed as a material question. And that perspective is very beautifully changed in a hadith of our Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa alihi. He says that inna qalb al-mu'min ma'a malih. The heart of inna qalb al-mar'i ma'a malih. The heart of a believer, the heart of a person, believer or a non-believer, the heart of a person is going to be with his wealth. That's just human nature. Your mal is going to have a gravitational force, your wealth, and your heart is going to be attracted to your wealth. Now, that might seem to be something that tells us to try to get rid of your mal as soon as possible. Because if it's going to exert that gravitational force, then we don't want that gravitational force pulling us towards the material world. And the Prophet says, "In qaddamahu ahabba an yalhaqa." That if a person sends forth that mal, uses it in ways that are pleasing to Allah, then the heart will want to join wherever that investment has been made. So if you use it, and by using it in the way that is pleasing to Allah, that doesn't mean that you're depriving yourself of it. You're using it in a way that is halal, that brings comfort and that honors your relationships, your family. If you're using it in a way that is bringing you closer to Allah and that is bringing you reward in the hereafter, then your heart will begin to seek a closeness to where your money is being saved. You'll want to come towards the hereafter. وَإِنْ خَلَّفَهُ أَحَبَّ أَنْ يَتَخَلَّفَ مَعَهُ. But if you leave your wealth in this world, if none of your investments are in the hereafter, and all of your investments are in this world, then you'll want to stay in this world. The time comes, then we will be clutching at our material life and we'll be unable to die at peace because we haven't built anything for the hereafter. So our mal will attract our heart, but that doesn't mean that it's a bad thing. It depends where we use it, why we spend it, and how we spend it. It might be there for us in this world, but it will also be there in the hereafter. That is taqdeemul mal. That is to send it forth for the hereafter, and that will bring a person to a better state in the hereafter. So the teaching that we have from the Prophet and from Ahlul Bayt is don't think about your wealth so much. That is the first step to solve that crisis, which is equally present when we don't have enough, then we're worried about where our expenses are going to be met from. Or when we have too much because we don't know what to do with it, properly speaking, and we get lost in it, that becomes the source of our self-worth. That becomes the source of our sense of how much we should spend and how we should live, because money doesn't like a vacuum. And so we begin to become slaves to our luxury. Another beautiful incident from the life of our first Imam, Amir al-Mu'mineen, Ali ibn Abi Talib alayhi salatu wassalam, illustrates that same principle. The principle that we're talking about is that the way to solve that crisis that we might have with regard to our material possessions is not to disvalue them, not to disregard them, not to think too much of them. And there is a difference. There was a companion of Amir al-Mu'mineen who lived in Basra. Basra was a relatively wealthy city. The number of Shia in that city was, in the time of Imam Ali and afterwards for several generations, not a very high number. But there were in Basra some very pious and very good believers. It was also a city that had a number of people who are known as Sufis. It was a city that had maritime trade and land trade, and didn't have oil wealth at that time like it does today. And even today, the oil wealth is not really present for the people of Basra, but it gets spent elsewhere. But it was a city that had a cosmopolitan and commercial atmosphere. And so there were people who were very pious. They were known as the Zuhad, pious in the sense of they had renounced the world. And there were people who were very wealthy. One of the companions of Imam Ali was wealthy. His name was Al-Ala ibn Ziyad. When Imam Ali came to Basra, he saw the house of Ala, and it was a mansion. Large, spacious, well-appointed, well-decorated. Now imagine that could be the house of some of the members of our own community. Probably it was even better than many of the mansions that members of our community may have. But imagine that Imam Ali comes to your house, and he looks around, and he says, Allah, what are you going to do with such a spacious house? You're going to be in more need of it in the hereafter. All of a sudden, that pride that you have in your home is going to be destroyed. And you can imagine what was going through the heart of Ala, that he was a follower of Imam Ali. Probably he was thinking, if that is the case, then I will sell it. I will replace this spacious house with something much more insignificant. The Imam let that sentence stay in the mind of Ala for a moment. And then he said, but you know, this very house can be your house in the hereafter. Or it can be the source of your home in the hereafter. If you host guests, if you use this as a means to bring your family close, to show your generosity to them, to show your munificence to them, if this is the space that you use to further your relationships with your family, with your tribe, with your community, and it is known as the house of a generous person, then this spacious house is not in competition with a mansion or a palace in the hereafter. This will be the source of that. So don't think about just the superficial aspect of that house, but think about how it can be used. And then Ala said that I have a complaint about my brother. His brother was known as Asim ibn Ziyad, and he was on the other extreme. I told you that Basra was a city of extremes. That often happens in these commercial capitals. If you go to London, if you go to New York City, if you go to many of these cities that have a great deal of trade and commerce, you will find billionaires, and you will find perhaps an above average number of people living below the poverty line. There are extremes in terms of economic resources, and then also in terms of the culture that is created within that environment. And so Asim, the brother of Ala, was from the same family, the same tribe, had the potential also perhaps to earn and to live a good life. And that would probably be what his family, his wife, his children would have expected from him. The Imam says, so tell me about Asim, what is it that you have a complaint for? And Allah said that, well, he has abandoned all of the requirements of his material life. He wears coarse clothing and spends his time in ibadah, and he wants to be a zahid, a nasik, a person who spends his entire time in worship. Imam Ali said that, have him come to me. And when he came, the Imam says that, do you think that Allah would have given you permission to use the bounties that He has created, and then He would be stingy about you using those bounties? If He has given you the opportunity to live a good life, then learn how to live that life without a guilty conscience, without having a guilty conscience. Use it for the sake of Allah. Use it to make the world a better place. Escaping from the world is not making the world a better place. That is not being a good steward of the opportunities that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given you. Trying to keep yourself superficially poor is not a good state. And then the Imam said something very harsh, just as he had shown a little bit of harshness to Ala before he brought him back and gave him the confidence that he can live a comfortable life and still earn a place in the hereafter, a similar message he gave to Asim. He says, أَنْتَ أَهْوَنُ عَلَى اللَّهِ مِنْ ذَلِكَ. You're more insignificant to Allah than for your utilization of His blessings to even factor in the decree of Allah. If somebody has a limited amount of something, then they're concerned about where it gets used. But if I have an unlimited supply, then it doesn't bother me how much somebody may take, how much somebody may use or consume or even destroy, because I have an infinite source. That spring, whatever is taken from it will be immediately replaced. We are far more insignificant for Allah than for Him to be worried about what bounties of His we use or we consume. He's concerned about how we consume them and how we use them, not because His treasuries are going to be depleted, but because He wants that to be a source for us to become better people. أَنْتَ أَهْوَنُ عَلَى اللَّهِ مِنْ ذَلِكَ. You're more insignificant than that. Imagine if I have to go somewhere where I know that I'm going to have to interact with somebody who I'm not a good friend with. So one way of managing that is for me to confront the person. We're going to meet at a wedding, and we have an unsettled score from our last family gathering. So I go to that person, and I yell at them. I say that they're a terrible person, and I may even cause an embarrassment for the people around me. That is obviously the wrong thing, to throw yourself into the dunya. But if I am so uneasy around that person that I have to artificially avoid the person, that's no better. If I have to leave whatever table that person comes to, I have to pretend to be busy with my phone or something as a distraction whenever that person is around me. That still shows that there is that insecurity within me. I have not come to terms with a past issue that may have been many years in the past, and I should be able to move beyond it. Both the confrontation and throwing yourself into confrontation and the withdrawing are a sign that there is a potential weakness within you. In some cases, one may be worse than the other. In other cases, the other one might be worse, but they are both a sign that there is a weakness within me. And that is the message that Amir al-Mu'mineen was giving to Asim. If you throw yourself into the world, then it means that you think the world is something. And if you withhold the world from you and you think that poverty by itself is a virtue, then it still means you think that the world and its material resources are something worthy of consideration, and you're avoiding contact. Both of them are giving too much credit and too much attention to that superficial level of worldly, material bounties or blessings. Move past the world and ask the question, how should I use it? Not how much should I have? That is the more important question. And that is perhaps the most important thing that is going to affect how we are going to die. Generally speaking, most of us who are not in old age, we don't give a whole lot of thought to how we would like to die. But there is no age that is too young for us to think about how is it that we would like to die. Most people would say that I don't want to have a protracted sickness. I don't want to be dependent on other people. I don't want to have a long, painful, slow deterioration. I especially don't want to lose my mental faculties and have some form of dementia, God forbid, or test that's going to cause problems for me and cause suffering and pain for my family members. Many people might say that I don't want to die alone either. I don't want to die so suddenly that it'll be a shock and more difficult for my family to bear. If we are to think about it, we may have certain thoughts about how we would like to die. And many of us, we may also have given some instructions. We may have a living will about some of the decisions that we want to be made for our care. You could purchase insurance in case you need to have extended nursing home care and other forms of decisions about the last moments of our life. All of that is worth thinking about. It will prepare us for the hereafter. But the one factor that is going to have the most influence over how we are going to die is the level of attachment we have to the material world. I don't control whether I am going to get a debilitating illness, whether, God forbid, I'm going to suffer dementia, whether I'm going to die a natural death or through some sickness or through an accident or any other means. All I know is that I am going to leave this world, and all of us are going to leave this world for the hereafter. But when that's going to happen, what circumstances they're going to be, that I don't control. But this most important factor, each of us controls. There are some people, because all of their thought is in this world, they're going to be unable to depart it. Their soul has spent its entire life planning for, enjoying, thinking about the material world. And they won't be able to depart from it. Think of the most painful bandage that you have ever peeled off that is stuck to the dried blood and the hair and whatever else you might have. And as you peel it, it feels as if you are opening up a wound that was worse than the original wound you had that you put the bandage on in order to try to heal. So the soul departing, every molecule within your body, and then every centimeter, every millimeter that you're going to move from this world is going to be like that glue that is suddenly trying to keep you there, and you're stretching it and pulling it and destroying every cell of your body in order to leave this world. For a person who spent their life attached to the world, that is what death will be. Because in the end, death is the departure from this material world to the spiritual realm. The more attachments that you have made, the more difficult it will be. It is only natural. And if we have attachments to the hereafter, and we don't have those attachments to this world, we still live in this world. We still enjoy the same bounties that those people who are attached to the world will enjoy. But dying is much easier. Because inna qalb al-mar'i ma'a malih. You've sent your mal forward. You've sent it to the hereafter. So it's easier for you to embark on that spiritual journey. And the key point is that that does not depend on how much money you have. There are many people who are poor and they are as attached to this world or more than many people who are wealthy. You might find a believing person who was wealthy, and they'll have an easier time departing this world because they never thought about living for this world. Whatever blessings Allah had given them, their only concern was, how can I use this in a way that is pleasing to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? Because that was their only concern. They lived a comfortable life, but it is easy for their soul to move to its higher existence. And there might be people who are wealthy, or there might be people who are poor. But departing this world is difficult. And so it's not the superficial circumstances that are going to be the most important in determining how our death is going to be and how our hereafter is going to be. But it is our relationship with that. The crisis exists on all ends, if we have just enough, or too little, or too much, depending on our attachment to this world. And if you want to see an example of how wealth need not spoil you, then the example of Aun and Muhammad, which we heard just before my presentation, is one of the best examples. You know that their father was Abdullah ibn Ja'far. And Abdullah ibn Ja'far was probably one of the wealthiest people in Medina, and maybe in the entire Muslim world, because he was an orphan in his own time. And when his father Ja'far al-Tayyar passed away, the widow, the mother of Abdullah and his brothers, brought them to the Prophet and said, "Can you make a prayer for my children?" And the Prophet prayed for Abdullah ibn Ja'far, "Allahumma barik lahu fi safqatih." Make his commerce blessed. And so Abdullah ibn Ja'far would never embark on a business transaction except that he would be blessed in that transaction. That was the prayer of Allah. And so Aun and Muhammad were raised the children of the wealthiest person in Medina and likely in Hijaz and maybe on the top 10 people in the entire Muslim world. But look at what kind of upbringing they must have had. That they had to leave Medina, their home, their environment that they had grown up in, all of the comforts, the love of their father. And they said that we are going to go on this journey. And they prepared themselves for martyrdom. What kind of children must they have been? And how proud must Lady Zainab have been of how they had come up as young men, that they were able to turn their back on the material world with such ease. And imagine how those nights must have been until the night of the day of Ashura, as Lady Zainab was preparing her own heart for their martyrdom. I don't know if Lady Zainab ever went to her sons and told them that, "My sons, until tonight, I used to pray to Allah to give you a long and a prosperous life. But you know, there came a time when my dua had to change. And now I am not praying for the circumstances of your life, but I am praying for your death and martyrdom, that I will not be embarrassed in front of my father and in front of my mother when I meet them in the hereafter, that the grandson of the Prophet was alone and my sons did not have the courage to defend Islam when they had the opportunity. I no longer pray for your life, but I pray for your death." Imagine the pain of a mother who knows that she's only going to have a few more hours in this life with her children, and yet she avoids spending too much time with them, and she avoids letting them see her tears because she doesn't want their courage to be reduced. And so she glimpses at them from the corner of the tent, and then she leaves to cry in solitude. Imagine an elderly mother whose children are her pride and her source of strength and support. But when she comes to them, she doesn't tell them her pains. She doesn't tell them her difficulties, but she only shows them that she has strength and she is waiting for them to fulfill the purpose of their life, to achieve martyrdom. How many times would Lady Zainab on the eve of Ashura have come forward to Aun and Muhammad, wanting to express to them what her motherly dreams for their marriage, for their children, for their lives would have been. But as she approached, she would only have said, "Oh my sons, have you sharpened your sword? Have you prepared your armor? Have you readied yourself for the battle? Because you have a very powerful legacy that you are to live up to." The day of Ashura came, and Lady Zainab in the early morning went to her sons. She said that, "I don't want it to be said that Lady Zainab kept her sons alive as long as she could. The moment that the battle begins, I want you to be the first to go and ask your uncle for permission to fight." But every time Aun and Muhammad would go to Imam Hussein, he would make some excuse. He would say that your father is in Medina and he has not given you permission. Your mother will be alone. Abbas is still counting on you because you are his soldiers. until Lady Zainab called her sons. She said that, my children, why is it that you are still alive? Are you not ready to do battle? Are you not willing to make me proud? Do you not know that I have been waiting from this morning to see you fight? And I want to see you martyred before my eyes. And they said, Mother, we have gone to our uncle time and time again. But whenever he sees us approaching, he breaks down in tears. And it's difficult for us to even express our desire to him. And then when we ask him for permission, he points to Medina, he points to your tent, he points to Abbas alayhi salam. We don't know how we can ask for permission. And Lady Zainab says, come, my children, I will get permission from your uncle. And so now Lady Zainab brings her sons to her brother. She says that, oh Hussein, how many times in my life have I asked you of anything? And the Imam says, Lady Zainab, you have never placed any demands on me, but have always been there to fulfill my needs. You have always been there by my side. And the sister of the Imam says that, oh my Imam, oh my brother, today I have come to you with a demand. And I hope that you will not refuse the request that I am to make of you right now. I myself have put the armor on my children. I myself have given the swords in their hands. I myself have prepared them for battle. They are ready to fulfill the legacy of their ancestor Ja'far al-Tayyar and Ali ibn Abi Talib. Will you accept them among the martyrs who are to shed their life for the sake of Islam? And the Imam wept for a while. He shed tears, but in the end he said, yes, Ozan. If this is your wish, then they are free to go and do battle. And Lady Zainab sent them off. They fought together, and they fought so bravely in spite of their youth, that it is said that Umar ibn Sa'ad asked his soldiers, who are these two that don't let any enemy soldier even approach them? Whenever one of them is surrounded, the other comes and repels the enemy soldiers, even at the expense of subjecting himself to wound after wound, attack after attack. And Umar ibn Sa'ad was told, these are the sons of Abdullah ibn Ja'far, the sons of Lady Zainab. And it is said that even he stood up in shock and said that what kind of love is it that Zainab has for her son? That she would be able to willingly send these two sons to give their lives for her brothers. And then he gave a cowardly command. He said that these warriors cannot be defeated in single combat. They are to be surrounded and they are to be attacked all at once. And so all Muhammad were surrounded. They were attacked and separated, and then one fell in battle, and then the other fell. And as they fell, they called out, Assalamu alayka ya Aba Abdullah, O our master, O our Imam, O Aba Abdullah, our salutations upon you. The Imam rushed towards the battlefield, and he may have paused and said that what must be the heart of Zainab at this moment, that she heard the call of her sons. But he rushed to the battlefield, and from by his side, Abu al-Fadl al-Abbas rushed also to the battlefield. One of them picked up the body of Aoun, the other picked up the body of Muhammad. They brought them back to the camp, and Imam was looking towards the tents to see where Lady Zainab would be so he could bring the body of her children to her. He saw that she was nowhere to be seen. Abu al-Fazl Abbas and Imam Hussein laid the bodies down outside of the tents. And then they went inside and they found that Lady Zainab was at peace. She was not in a state of worry. She was not in a state of weeping, but she was in a state of utter tranquility, prostrating towards the Qibla. and saying, "Oh Allah, it is my honor that you have accepted my sacrifice from me." Unite them with their grandfather, the Messenger of Allah, with their grandmother Fatima Zahra. And oh Allah, grant me patience to be able to always remember the sacrifice that they gave in your path. Inna lillah wa inna ilayhi raji'un.
मैं क्या बताऊं दोस्तों, तुम्हें कि क्या हुसैन है। मैं क्या बताऊं दोस्तों, तुम्हें कि क्या हुसैन है। हुसैन फख्र अंबिया, हुसैन दी की लाज है। हर एक दिल में आज भी हुसैन ही का राज है। यजीद कब का मिट चुका, यजीद कब का मिट